Welcome back. It is the NW Sportscast. Today we are talking about your Seattle Seahawks and the future of this team. John Schneider just went on his press conference. First time we've heard him speak since the Pete Carroll decision. And all I can say is there's some interesting stuff being heard. It sounds like they're not close to hiring a new head coach yet. That makes sense. A lot of the top candidates are still more focused on the playoffs right now. A lot of the guys that we've seen, some of our fans in the comment sections that are wanting us to go out and get, guys like Mike McDonald, guys like Ben Johnson, they're still worried about their own teams right now in the playoffs. So it makes sense we haven't had time to interview them yet. So I don't think we're going to see a hiring until probably next month. But Drew, I just want to ask you, from your perspective as a fan, where do you lean in the coaching search? Who are you looking for? Who do you look at as like, I want
Yeah,
this guy?
yeah. The first guy that I kind of, there's obviously John Schneider in his press conference said that they're going to cast a wide net of options and no list is too long. So what that means to me is that this is not going to be over anytime soon and that they're not going to leave any rock unturned. With that being said, I think one of the most popular candidates that a lot of people have on their list, and he's number one on mine, is Bobby Slowick for
Mm.
the Texans offensive coordinator. I think it's super, super intriguing and a very attractive person to get because of what he did with Stroud his rookie year. And you know how much, Levi, I want the Seahawks to draft a quarterback this year. I think it's absolutely imperative that the Seattle Seahawks draft a guy and even move up if they need to. And I think the number one goal, the number one thing that head coach will need to do is to foster that rookie quarterback into a star in this league. And I think that Bobby Slowick is the perfect guy to do that. He's on the younger side. He's really, really good offensively. He'll be able to compete with the McVay and Shanahan's of the world. And hopefully, if we get a guy like a Penix, even like a JJ McCarthy, hopefully he'll be able to kind of craft them into an upper tier quarterback in this league.
Yeah, that's a really good choice, Drew. And I think what's interesting is he was an assistant with Washington with Kyle Shanahan. Then he was an assistant in Atlanta with Kyle Shanahan. Then he was an assistant with the 49ers with Kyle Shanahan. So this
Yeah.
guy has worked very closely with one of the most successful offensive minds in the NFL. And we just saw the Dolphins. They went out and got Mike McDaniels, also one of Kyle Shanahan's proteges. And you see how successful they've been. So,
Well,
you
and
know,
it's important to get a guy like that because we played the Niners twice.
yeah, we
So
played them
it,
twice.
so it's very important to, maybe he'll have some insight into how to stop Shanahan and those Niners. Because let's be real, Levi, if you don't get at least one win a year against the Niners, you're probably not winning the division. So that's
No.
a really big factor.
Yeah, absolutely is. Um, Another guy that I've been interested in, a couple other kind of same level guys as you, young offensive coordinators. The Buccaneers, Dave Canales, former Seahawks assistant to the head coach. He coached tight ends, he coached wide receivers, he was their passing game coordinator, and he was also our quarterback coach at different times throughout his career with the Seahawks. He was brought in by Pete Carroll, and he did a lot of really good things. He worked very closely with Russ, worked very closely with some of our stud receivers, Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett. He also worked very closely with Geno Smith. So I think and this year went to Tampa Bay, and in his first year as their offensive coordinator, he improved their offense after they lost Tom Brady. So that's pretty impressive in my eyes, to lose Tom Brady and replace him with Baker Mayfield, and the offense actually got better. That's pretty impressive to me. So I think he's a guy who we should seriously consider because he does have ties into the Seahawks.
Yeah, no, we definitely should consider that. They put up 9 points against the Panthers last week. A little concerning, but then they
Put up
respond.
32
They
against the
put up
Eagles.
and they put up 35 against the Eagles. So hey,
Yeah.
he's definitely an interesting candidate to look at. One guy that I think the whole league is looking at, and I don't think we'll be able to get. I think we'll probably go to a little bit more, maybe a Chargers or a team that already has a really good quarterback. But it's Ben Johnson, you know, offensive coordinator for the Lions. You've seen what he done with Jared Goff and Amon Ra, all those guys. They're going to make a serious run. into the playoffs here. I think the Lions are one of the teams, other than the Niners, I think that they're the favorite to go to the Super Bowl out of the NFC. And I think a lot of that is because of Ben Johnson. And just a couple of years after getting rid of Stafford, he's really turned this franchise around. And I, love Dan Campbell and love everything he does. But when you come for, he's not a guy that is as good as scheming. And, Ben Johnson is the guy that really makes the offense go. Campbell's more of the motivator. And I think a lot of credit should go to him. And I think that'd be a really, really attractive candidate to get, Levi.
Yeah, and the question about Ben Johnson is, would he rather go to a place like Washington where he can get his pick at number 2 and potentially bring in Drake May?
And probably.
Probably but at the same time, I don't think Seattle is necessarily a not attractive coaching position. I think,
No, it is.
and especially if you throw enough money at a guy, he'll probably come. So I think if he is the best guy that John Schneider interviews, which so far we haven't even, I don't think we've requested to interview him. I know there's some rumors that are out there about a lot of different guys. I haven't heard about Ben Johnson yet. But if he does come in an interview and if he's the best guy that Schneider interviews, I think we should try our very best to bring him in. I don't think we should let money be a factor here, but and we're not the Mariners, so I don't think it will be a factor. If this was the Mariners, we'd be shopping in the Walmart section. He's like, the random defensive line coordinator of Cleveland, but no, I think we're gonna go and get the best guy who we want, and if that's a Jim Harbaugh, who I personally don't want. But if we interview Jim Harbaugh and he's the best guy, then I think we're gonna throw the money at him.
Hopefully. Yeah, Levi. So these are the guys that we've currently requested / had an interview with. The first guy was Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, which I think is still probably the number 1 candidate in a lot of people's eyes. But after what just happened against the Packers in the playoffs,
I wouldn't do it.
I think that makes it a lot less appealing.
Yeah.
Then you got offensive coordinator Frank Smith for the Dolphins. We requested an interview for Panthers defensive coordinator Ajiro Evero. So that's, maybe something to look at. The Panthers obviously held the Bucks to 9, and then the Eagles let them get 35. That'd be an interesting way to go. We got Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris. We requested an interview with. We requested an interview with Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka, which I personally would not do because it's from the Giants. Raiders defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. We got Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson.
Oh, so he is on that list.
He's on the list.
Okay.
Texas offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick. So those are the guys so far that we have requested an interview with. Obviously, that's not fully, that list is not complete yet, unless a guy absolutely stands out. But even if he does, I bet that John Schneider will turn over every rock that he can before he makes a decision. With that being said, though, there is something called being a little too picky and a little too tedious. If you like a guy, I feel like you've got to throw the money at him and make him an offer before someone else snatches it up. And I think that, let's say we have a really good interview with Bobby Slowick, right? And it goes super well, but, we haven't interviewed a few of the other guys. Someone else will take Bobby Slowick. And that's kind of the thing that I don't want to be stuck with a random defensive coordinator from the Panthers. And, I'm sure he's great. And I'm sure, he might do fine, but I really want a young offensive coordinator. And I think that all Seahawks fans are kind of looking to move in that direction. We had Pete Carroll, we had the Legion of Boom, we had the defensive era of football, but football has changed from 10 years ago. And I think it's time to change with it. It's time to compete with the McVay and Shanahan's of the world. And it's time to get a young offensive coordinator to be the new Seahawks head coach.
Yeah, I agree. I think you talked about the Carolina Panthers, and Ajiro Evero. Their defense has been pretty good, but I think he hasn't been really a top of the league defensive coordinator for long enough to justify that, and B, he doesn't come from a winning culture. So I think a big thing John Schneider talked about, he said ownership told him, we want you to hire somebody who's going to be able to maintain the Seahawks culture. And I think that's a culture of success. Same thing with Patrick Graham on the Raiders. I understand the Raiders had a good defense this year, but ultimately the Raiders are not a team who have done a lot of winning in the past, 5-10 years. And so to hire a guy who comes from a team with kind of a losing culture, whether or not their defense was good, it would worry me just a little bit of like, that's not the type of organization they're coming from. At least Mike Kafka on the Giants, and he did come from the Chiefs, worked with Andy Reid
Yeah.
really closely, worked with Mahomes. So that's kind of the upside there, is maybe maybe he played a bigger factor in Mahomes and that offense than people realize. But at the same time, he went to the Giants, and, I'm not sure how much of a factor he's had there. The Giants obviously aren't very good offensively, and there's a lot of reasons why. So you can't really blame just him, but he is meant to be better than the 28th best offense in the league.
Yeah.
It's like, just looking at that, like, really, we're interviewing the coordinator for the 28th best offense.
Yeah,
Um,
no. A guy
yeah,
like Avera, though, going back to that, if he wants to come be the defensive coordinator for us, though, I'd be all for it. If you can convince
yeah.
him to move from the Panthers to the Seahawks, I think the Seahawks are a little bit more attractive of a team to be a defensive coordinator for than the Panthers. But what he has over there is working. So,
Well, and the
we'll see
factor in
what
that,
happens.
Drew, is he's also interviewing for the Panthers head coaching job. So imagine
Mm,
if the Panthers turn him down, maybe he wants to leave Carolina just
yeah,
out of spite.
yeah, for sure. We'll see what happens. And I think a lot of what John Schneider ends up doing, I think will come down to what he does as far as his decision on drafting a quarterback.
Oh
And
yeah.
I know not everything links back to that, but in this case, a lot does. If he thinks he's going to keep Geno Smith, a guy like Dan Quinn might be a little bit more, a little bit more valuable, a little bit more useful. But if he is set on drafting a quarterback, it's time to move on. It's time to get a young offensive coordinator. It's time to get Bobby Slowick, a guy like that. I think that's the way to go. We'll see what John Schneider ends up doing. But, there's no point to, I feel like you got to, if you get one, you got to get the other. If you don't go a quarterback route, I think it's fine to stick with a defensive coordinator type of guy. If you go a quarterback route, it's time to move on from the classic run the football, play defense ideology of the Seahawks.
I agree. And that's why ultimately, if I was John Schneider, I'm going to try my best to hire either Ben Johnson or Dave Canales. If neither of those guys for some reason, then I would probably look to Frank Smith with the Dolphins. One of those three offensive coordinators. Those are my favorites.
I don't love Canales, Levi. I
Really,
don't. Yeah.
really, a guy who's
I
been with the organization, goes away from the Seahawks, immediately has success. I think he'd be a great move.
but how much success has it really been? How
Well,
much?
they're one of the 8 best teams in the
How
NFL.
many games have they won?
10 now.
Okay, well they won 9. How many
And,
did the
well, and
Seahawks
it's his
win?
first,
How
and
many did
it's
the
his
Seahawks
first
win?
9. But
Okay,
it's his first
so
season as an
they
offensive
so each
coordinator,
team's
and he
won
had a
9
better
ones, and they
offense
played the
than
Eagles.
Seattle.
Okay, they beat the Eagles. We beat the Eagles too. I don't think he's
Yeah.
had some stellar offense. Like I've never watched the Buccaneers outside of the playoff game and was like, man, that offense is just humming.
Well, I guess we'll see against the Lions. We'll see which one of them.
I bet they'll tear up the Lions too, because you know why? Because the Lions isn't
Lions
that
have a
good of a
bad
defense
team.
either.
Yeah.
So hey, if Geno Smith and those boys can put points up against the Eagles and the Lions, I don't doubt that Dave Canales and
Yeah.
Baker Mayfield will be able to do that too. I just don't think that's the route I'm trying to go. And I think he hasn't proven enough, Levi. I really don't.
So who would be, if you can't get Ben Johnson, who's your second choice? Bobby
Slow it.
Slowick? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
slow. And if you
I mean,
can't get,
Johnson's number
let's
one, but I
say,
feel like that's everyone's number one.
yeah, let's say you can't get Bobby Slowick, who's your third choice?
Oof, it's tough. I think then you got to look at a guy like Dan Quinn, and I know it's not.
Wow.
I'm not a
I'm
huge
not a
fan of that
Quinn.
option,
I'm not a Quinn
but
guy.
he brought the Falcons to a Super Bowl as head coach. He's shown he can win in the past. He's been in the program. He can instill some of that Pete Carroll esque style of football that Schneider himself says he wants to keep in the building. So although it's not my number one option, I think that's something you got to look at.
Yeah, I mean, what worries me with Quinn is a really, really mixed bag of playoff results, as well as just the fact that
True.
I think Quinn is just a continuation of kind of the Pete Carroll era.
Good point.
And I don't know if that's the direction I would want to go in.
I'd
Just because
probably choose
you're
Frank
gonna move
Smith
on from
over.
Pete, you should be doing it to go in a new direction. You shouldn't. I don't think there's any reason to fire Pete if you're just gonna hire Pete 2.0, because in that case, The original is usually
Funny.
better than the sequel, and I do think Pete Carroll's a better coach than Dan Quinn. So if the plan all along is, we're gonna fire Pete and bring in Dan Quinn to replace him, I would have rather just kept Pete.
I don't think he's Pete 2.0
Well, I
necessarily.
mean, but he learned his defense from Pete Carroll
Yeah. And Pete Carroll's defense was really good for a long time.
for a real
So
long time. Yeah,
I'd probably choose Frank Smith over
yeah,
Dan Quinn. But well, we'll see what happens in the search for the new Seahawks head coach. Once that gets figured out, then it'll be time to look at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator because I think Waldron and I think Hurt, they both have to go, in my opinion.
yeah. I could see a world where you keep Shane Waldron if you're hiring an offensive head coach.
I don't see Clint Hurt staying. I
I
really
don't
don't.
see Clint Hurtt staying. I know this would cost a lot of money to go get this guy, but if Mike Vrabel doesn't get another head coaching job, I think he's the best guy out there in the market because he had a lot of success as a defensive coordinator and as a defensive head coach. I would think he could be a really interesting name to bring in as our next defensive coordinator.
Vrabel's gonna get a job.
You think he will?
He's gonna
I'm
get a
not
job.
convinced.
I'm convinced. I
Really.
am.
We'll
I think
see.
Vrabel will get a job. I think we should look into Vrabel, honestly,
As
for
head
our head
coach,
coach position.
I don't know if I'd look into him. I feel like hiring guys who
Yeah, but
just got
he's
fired,
done.
hiring a guy who just got fired and just gives me the wrong look.
Yeah, but he got fired. A lot of people think, including myself, think that was kind of a weird firing by the Titans. I think who they will end up getting is probably going to be worse than Vrabel. Look, with Tannehill and with absolute bums, he's led those teams to the playoffs and to playoff wins. I
Yeah.
mean, that has to say something, Levi. I think Geno Smith is by far a better quarterback than Tannehill. And this is kind of going back to my last point. I think if John Schneider ends up making the decision that they're going to run back Geno Smith one more year and then draft a quarterback in 2025, I think Mike Vrabel is a really, really good option. He's done, you know, he's made lemonade out of lemon juice. He's a really tough guy. He can instill some of that competitive energy being a former player that Pete Carroll had in Seattle, but he's not Pete Carroll. He will like really change the ideology in Seattle. He's a winner. He's won everywhere he's gone. He won with the Patriots, he won with the Titans. And last year wasn't his best year. And I think that was an absolute overreaction by whoever the Titans owner is by firing him. And I think that getting Mike Vrabel is certainly an option to look at. Again, I'm not saying it's my number one option. I think you got to go with Ben Johnson or Bobby Sloak if he's there. But Mike Vrabel is a guy that I wouldn't overlook, Levi. I really wouldn't. And I think that if you overlook him, you're a fool. So I mean, that's
Okay. I
just my
mean,
opinion.
my
But
my overlooking of him is just I haven't seen many guys get fired and then get hired the next year and have success.
I haven't seen many guys bring Ryan Tannehill to the playoffs and getting a playoff win. But
Yeah. That
like,
goes both
what?
ways. It's true.
So you think because the Titans made a bad decision, he's not going to get hired?
Well, I think that the Titans, I don't necessarily think it was a bad decision. I mean, they had back to
I
back
do.
losing
I
seasons.
was a bad decision. It was a
Back
bad
to back
decision.
losing seasons. How bad of a decision can it be? We fired Pete Carroll after 9-8.
He's
So
working with Will Levis and Ryan Tannehill,
yeah, yeah, I don't know.
a declining Derrick Henry, a defense that isn't great,
But
and,
when
and
he
you could
was, yeah,
you could argue that's his fault, or you could argue his personnel isn't good. Levi, name 5 players on the Titans.
they got Derrick Henry. They got well, didn't they have DeAndre Hopkins, right?
Yeah, okay. DeAndre
They
Hopkins.
had Will Levis, Ryan Tannehill. You know, they traded their safety to the Eagles. Who's their receiver? Who's their other receivers? And Nick Westbrook in Hine, I think is his name. Yeah, okay. You got me. I know about 6 players in the Titans, but still.
So that's my point. Like, I don't think Vrabel's given that much to work with, and he's done a lot with those players. The Titans were they the team that knocked off
They beat
did they
Brady in
knock
his
off
last game in New
Tom
England.
Brady? Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I thought. So I mean,
His last playoff game as a Patriot, lost to the Titans.
yeah. So I don't know. I think Vrabel isn't the best option, but I definitely think that if the top few offensive coordinators get scooped up, I would probably rather go Vrabel than a lot of these other names. I think Vrabel and Dan Quinn are probably neck and neck with me right now. Dan Quinn, again, I can talk myself into liking it, but deep down, I just don't think much will change. So that's kind of where I fall onto on that.
Yeah, I'd probably prefer Vrabel over Dan Quinn. I
Yeah.
think the other guy who the only other coach, previously fired coach that I would look at is Brian Flores. Also, just because the situation, he was fired from a team, not necessarily because he was bad, but because he wanted to get rid of Tua and the owner wanted to keep Tua. So they fired Brian Flores and went in a different direction. But they fired him after a winning season. So I do think he's the other guy you could maybe look at and convince yourself he's done really good things with the Minnesota Vikings defense as their coordinator. So that's the other guy I would look at. But for the most part, I want somebody who I think I would like somebody who hasn't been a head coach before, because I think you need to just kind of inject that young blood in.
Yeah. No, I see where you're coming from, and
And maybe that's because we're younger. That's where we want to go. And older fans are the kind of the ones who are on the radio talking about how, yeah, we should go out and get Dan Quinn. We should go out and get, I've heard people say Bill Belichick even, and a lot of more of the younger fans are kind of pushing for, let's go get an offensive coordinator. Let's go get Mike McDonald's, a young defensive coordinator. It kind of does speak to that generation gap there, because the older guys want to bring in somebody who they know they can trust, and the younger fans would like somebody who they think kind of can bring in some new energy to this team.
yeah, it's a great point, Levi. And I think that we will see if the Pete Carroll firing will was the right decision by Jody Allen and John Schneider very shortly. And based off of what happens in these next couple months, probably even next few weeks, we'll see what ends up happening. Yeah, we'll definitely see if the Seattle Seahawks will be better off in 2024 than they were in 2023, or if they've taken a step back. Levi, you asked me a question to start the show, and to round off the show, I'm going to ask you the same question. Well, if you're one guy, if you could just have your pickings, who would it be, and who's the one guy that you really would stay away from?
The one guy, I mean, I think I've already said this, but my favorite is definitely Ben Johnson. Just what he's done with
Yeah.
Detroit
Okay.
speaks volumes. Um, One guy that I would stay away from. I understand that he is a great option on the market, but I would stay away from Jim Harbaugh, because I don't think that it's the right way to honor Pete Carroll's legacy by going out there and hiring his arch nemesis from multiple different eras of their lives. They were
Boo hoo. I don't
nemesis
care.
in college and in the NFL. I would not bring him in.
If
I think
Harbaugh is the best option, he's the best option. He
I think
wins
at some
everywhere he
point
goes.
you
He
got to
won
stay
with the
away from
Niners.
him.
He won at Michigan. He
It's true.
won.
He
He
won
won
in
at
San
Stanford.
Diego.
Yeah.
Only head coach to win anything in San Diego.
I would stay away from Belichick. That'd be my guy. I don't even know if that's an option, but I don't think Bill Belichick is the guy to bring in after firing Pete Carroll for
Yeah,
sure.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, so I think that'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the NW Sportscast. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you liked it, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe on the video. It means a lot to us. It helps out the algorithm, and it recommends our video to more people. And we will see certainly what happens with the Seahawks hiring of a new head coach very shortly. We'll give you all that content and more in the coming weeks. Thanks so much for watching. This is the NW Sportscast. And as always, Levi.
Go Seahawks.